I extend a warm welcome to all of you here today at the 2015 Paris Climate Change Summit. We are here today to discuss climate change and how it affects our polity of the European Union. I welcome especially three stakeholders of our European Union: France, Germany and Poland. It is essential we develop a viable solution which will ultimately reduce the amount of greenhouse gases emitted. From our research, the European Union surmises that climate change is a direct result of all of the gases that are byproducts of human processes. These gases have built up a layer around the Earth that traps sun rays in what is known as the advanced greenhouse effect, a phenomenon that is increasing the Earth's average temperature.
In the EU, the creation of energy through fuel combustion is by far the sector that produces the most greenhouse gas. In 2013, 57.2% of all greenhouse gases produced in the EU were produced through this process. Transport contributed to 22.2%, 9.6% through agriculture, and 7.8% through industrial processes. We, as members of the EU, must take responsibility for being the third largest greenhouse gas producing entity. Germany, you emit 21% of our greenhouse gases, followed by the UK with 13%, and then France with 11%. In order to reduce the amount of emissions, and therefore not only save us, but our planet, tangible goals must be established.
Poles lack an understanding about the causes of climate change. There is a 50% consensus among the population that climate change is a serious threat. However, for 38% of Poles, climate change is believed to be caused by humans, for 6% it is a natural process, and for 52% it is both natural and human-caused. There is no denying that we have contributed to greenhouse gas emissions, as our economy is still heavily dependent on coal and carbon-based produce infrastructure. This has made our air the second most polluted in Europe after Bulgaria. But unlike Germany, France and the UK, Poland hasn't had the same opportunities to develop more advanced infrastructure due to war and communist oppression.
The view of France is that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's scientific conclusions are unquestionable. There is no doubt that global warming is taking place. The IPCC considers it extremely likely, and more than a 95% probability, that human activity is responsible for the increase in mean global temperatures since the mid-20th century. France sees itself as a leading role in tackling climate change both in the EU and internationally, as the host of the successful COP21. France accounts for only 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, despite contributing up to 4% of global GDP. It ranks amongst the industrial countries with the lowest greenhouse gas emissions in terms of both emissions per capita and emissions per GDP unit. This is the result of not only an electricity mix based primarily on nuclear energy, but also its ambitious commitment to proactive greenhouse gas emission reduction policies. France will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030, then 60% by 2040, to ensure the EU, as the world's third largest emitter, maintains an ambitious and exemplary approach.
Germany's stance is closely aligned with the European Union's when it comes to the cause of climate change. It is time that enforcement measures are put into place in order to combat this global issue. In recent years, Germany has increasingly placed itself in a pioneer position in climate policy, particularly because of the strong promotion of renewable energy to generate electricity while simultaneously phasing out nuclear energy. Germany has generated international attention. The consistent implementation of the energy concept and the energy transition in Germany places us as a role model to combat global warming. Not only developed countries, but also developing countries could take the role model for a transformative climate and the energy policy. Successful climate policy in Germany and internationally could lead to more ambitious policies and improved climate protection.
That's right, Germany. International cooperation is needed in order to reach our goal of preventing the global average temperature from rising 2 degrees Celsius compared to the global average in pre-industrial times. How has climate change directly affected you, Poland?
Poland is situated in a particularly significant place in Europe because it sits between polar, tropical, maritime and continental air masses and temperate climatic zones. This means that the north is becoming increasingly affected by heat and the south by water restrictions because of drought. Evapotranspiration has exceeded the amount of rainfall in some parts of the country, making water management an increasing concern. I believe that Germany, being a close neighbour, is experiencing similar problems.
You sure do. Declining groundwater levels in the summer, especially in southwestern Germany. The groundwater is essential for the natural ecosystem survival and its integrated crops. Furthermore, the primary source for drinking water in Germany is groundwater. It makes up 66.5%. There will be also an elevated risk of forest fires, especially in southwestern and northeastern parts of Germany. A greater risk of flooding in the rainy fall, especially along the Elbe River.
The effects of climate change will only become more severe as time goes on. France has already experienced an annual average temperature increase of 0.95 degrees Celsius compared to an average global temperature increase of 0.74 degrees Celsius, which is a difference of about 30%. Summers are getting warmer, and in winter the number of days with extreme temperatures is decreasing. This will result in a lot more severe heat waves, but almost no cold spells. The north of France is facing increased precipitation, whilst the south is facing longer droughts. The French Alps are seeing an alarming decrease in snow levels, with some areas seeing a 50% decrease in snow depth. Natural disasters such as floods, forest fires and severe heat waves will become much more common. France's overseas territories are mostly insular, so as such are particularly vulnerable to climate change impacts such as sea level rise.
A sector of the EU that has been heavily influenced by climate change is the agricultural sector. As the quality of crops is directly influenced by climate variables and CO2 levels, agriculture is a field heavily susceptible to climate change. However, given the vast size of the EU, member states will be subject to effects that vary from nation to nation. In northern, colder states, an increase in temperature is beneficial to crop production as growing seasons are lengthened. In contrast, higher temperatures in the warmer southern states add further strain on the crops and their water supplies. Thus, while these northern states may benefit, the yields of southern states are hammered by persistent droughts and heat waves. As a result, the inhabitants of these areas are subject to soaring prices and, in some instances, job loss.
The droughts Poland has been experiencing have decreased the national yield of potatoes and wheat, which Poland heavily relies on. These crops are not resistant to the hot conditions and are heavily influenced by climate change.
France is the largest agricultural producer and exporter in the EU. Climate change will eventually reduce the freshwater supply in France, which particularly affects the agricultural industry, which uses 48% of the water supply currently. Less availability of water will drive the cost of agriculture up. In terms of crop yield, France will experience a general reduction across the board in the future. The severity of the impact depends on the region and crop type affected. For example, yield will decrease particularly in the south and southwest, but increase generally in more northerly areas. The maize crop is projected to decrease in yield, but the wheat crop will increase in yield. The wine industry will experience great change, with some areas and types of grapes benefiting from the change of climate, whilst others will be severely affected.
Tourism is another area that has suffered as a result of climate change. Poland's northern coast is a very touristic area. The increase in temperature means there is less ice in winter, protecting the coast from the increasingly frequent storms, causing a lot of erosion to the soft sandy beaches. The Baltic area not only brings in a lot of money to tourism, but also into the ports, harbours and shipyards and highly industrialised areas such as Gdańsk and Elbląg. There is also some concern that if sea levels rise enough, there will be problems with displacement of individuals who live along the coast. Estimates have reached as high as 230,000 people.
This increase in temperature will lead to a reduction of winter sport tourism in 1,000 regions. If it should come to a temperature increase of up to 4.5 degrees by 2100, all German ski areas would be permanently free of snow. However, due to the milder and warmer climate in northern Germany, it can nevertheless be expected that the tourism in north will pick up.
In France, tourism accounts for around 9% of GDP. Like other alpine nations, climate change will reduce the level of tourism to these regions significantly. Winter tourism in general will take a hit in the future. Summer tourism is projected to expand, however, due to the attraction that warmer weather provides. On the other hand, France's overseas territories will suffer greatly. For example, hotels on the seaside of French Polynesia are experiencing erosion and are already having to erect sea walls.
Through affecting the environments of nations within the EU, climate change has also impacted the health of its inhabitants. As previously mentioned, climate change has caused an increase in temperature, which subsequently has increased the number of droughts and fires in Europe. In 2003, a summer heatwave in Europe took the lives of tens of thousands of people across 5 countries, a freakish event emblematic of the devastating effects of climate change that must act as a warning.
Having very polluted air, Poland has a high concentration of particulate matter in the atmosphere. The heat allows these particles to disperse and were estimated to have caused 39,800 premature deaths in the year 2000.
There will be also an increase in heat-related illnesses, especially in southern Germany. However, these issues will be reflected all across Europe though.
The increase in heat waves will cause a large rise in heat stress-related illness and death. The increased temperatures also bear the risk of gradual transmission of vector-borne diseases from Africa to Europe.
These causes are being felt universally in Europe, which is why all the member states have agreed to the emissions reductions goals that will be discussed in the COP12 in 2014. The European Union has taken both a domestic and an international stance. As recent as last month, there has been great international progress in the signing of the Paris Agreement. This agreement has set out a plan in which the previously mentioned goal of preventing the global average temperature from rising 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels can be reached. 195 countries have signed the agreement, pledging their commitment to this objective, along with several others that, ultimately, aim to combat climate change immediately. The European Union has unanimously agreed to emissions reductions goals of 40% by the year 2030. However, this meeting has been called so countries can also be given the opportunity to express any concerns that they have in regard to achieving these goals.
Poland is currently facing a lot of internal governmental issues regarding the emissions goals that the member states have agreed to. Our previous government was ready to commit to these goals. However, the current government, under President Andrzej Duda, feels more concerned with our economy and feels it is impractical to commit to such a high percentage reduction of emissions given the state of our infrastructure to do so. Adapting to manage climate change means restructuring the economy, and Poland is currently catching up, so to speak, to the other large member states. Poland currently has a very high GDP growth rate of approximately 3.3%, as opposed to 1.6% in Germany and 0.4% in France. Changing the economy would hinder Poland's performance and is an unfavourable action to take at this point in time. By allowing Poland to first focus on improving itself, President Duda is certain that the reduction in emissions will follow.
By combating global warming, it may affect the quality of life of the population due to changes in their lifestyle. We equipped old chimney systems with filters, renewed factory facilities, and installed thermal insulation in public buildings. Once that was done, the worst environmental sins were abolished. We politicians must come up with more solutions to achieve the climate protection targets. The government must pass legislation to set limits and make regulations. However, they must above all convince its citizens that climate protection makes sense and benefits all. Globally, policymakers and politicians must question the restriction of the dangerously high CO2 emissions without limiting economic development or reduction of living standards.
We have found a lot of short-term solutions to our problems with the erosion of the coast, flooding and heat waves that can quite easily be implemented. Managing climate change means implementing policies. This would help Poland combat climate change internally more effectively. In saying this, there are a lot of differences in opinion on how to implement climate change policies. 36% of the country believes that legislation is needed to manage climate change, while 33% believe it's people's behaviour that matters the most. Most polls seem to be leaning towards the idea that the transition to renewable energy is a solution. However, in 2009 there was a 24% preference for nuclear power. Whichever solution Poland chooses, it would mean completely restructuring the economy. 85% of Poland's electricity comes from 53 power plants. The RE-MAP 2013 Renewable Energy Prospects for Poland report has found that Poland could easily increase its share to renewable energy to 38% in 2013, but current renewable energy policies only allow for a 15.5% goal to be met.
Germany likewise has come up with a small but effective solution to combat climate change. Based on the car's performance, it will be awarded with a red, yellow or green sticker. The car's age and whether it has a particulate filter all will be taken into consideration. The red sticker being on the low end of the spectrum when it comes to environmental friendliness, and the green sticker being very environmentally friendly. Since the 1st of April 2016, there are 53 low-emission zones in Germany. In 51, only vehicles with a green sticker are allowed. Germany also has an Agenda 2020 plan which addresses the following key areas: electricity production, consumption, heating, transportation and other gases. We will cut electricity consumption by 11% by increasing the efficiency of the equipment, improving engine performance in the industrial field, and reduce the amount of power used in standby modes. We intend to address the energy efficiency of buildings by modernizing them, doubling the pace of modernization, and converting to more efficient heating systems by introducing tougher thermal standards for new buildings. Germany already has increased the consumption of biofuels to 8% in 2015. Fluorinated gases are very long-lasting and have a very high warming potential compared to CO2. Primarily, these gases are used as refrigerants, propellants, and the fire suppression. There are climate-friendly alternatives for almost all of these gases. Germany tends to move to alternative gases that are already available or are in development.
France is committed to all its EU and international obligations in regards to climate change action. It reaches out to underdeveloped nations in order to support them in combating climate change. Internally, the French government believes that it needs to take an exemplary approach in the struggle against climate change, in accordance with the wishes of French citizens and businesses. To this end, the government has initiated an ecological and energy transition, involving a larger switch to renewable energy sources and support for cleaner transport. A carbon tax system is in place. It will introduce a carbon inclusion mechanism for sectors of the economy most exposed to international competition to ensure fairness. France understands that it is its overseas territories that are the most threatened by climate change and will ensure it does its part to defend them.
Well, that is fantastic to hear, Germany and France. And Poland, you have room for improvement. However, the European Union is committed to supporting you in adapting to the new requirements regarding emission levels. Well, with that, I'd like to conclude the Climate Change Summit for 2015. We've each shared our woes imposed on us by the effects of climate change, but have also set out tangible and agreeable goals that will allow each of us to effectively combat climate change as a cohesive unit. I thank you for attending today and wish you the best of luck on our united journey to save our planet.